Thanks to the Friends of Italy Society of Hawaii, as always, for hosting me for these talks. They're a lot of fun for me. I'm getting ready to go back to Italy in less than 2 weeks to start some fall tours. And this kind of whets my appetite, especially when I start talking about the food and the wine and all the fun things to do. So please feel free at any time to put in any questions that you have, or hold your questions for the end. I'm happy to answer any and all questions that you might have to the best of my ability. So with that said, my name again is Trina Kudlacek, if this is your first time joining us. And I've been a guide since about 2006. And I currently work for Rick Steves Europe, and I also work for a very small guide company called Guided By, where I organize my own tours as well. But today, we're going to be talking about the Cinque Terre, and I don't do tours to Cinque Terre, but I've been going to Cinque Terre for a very long time with other groups. And I also actually lived in Cinque Terre in the wintertime, which is a different experience. And I also ran off one summer and rented kayaks on the beach in Vernazza, which was kind of a fun thing to do. So I'll share some personal experiences and also some tips for those of you who are planning to head that way. So with that said, we'll go ahead and get started with an overview. So what I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to talk about the history of the area briefly, mostly as it relates to what you're going to eat and what you're going to see. Not really delving into a lot of the history, but just an overview. And then transportation, how to move around in the Cinque Terre, hiking especially, that's one of the main draws for being in the Cinque Terre. And then, as always, avoiding crowds. I will tell you right here in the first minute of this talk that the Cinque Terre has been discovered. It is on travel posters for Italy, probably publicized all around the world. So it is very, very crowded at certain moments, but I'm going to try to help you avoid those crowds. One of those ways is to travel to some lesser known, what I call jewels nearby, which are just to the north and the south, where you might want to either hike to those places or spend a day there or even stay there. So I want to give you some ideas of some alternatives outside of those 5 towns. And then obviously, always with Italy, food and wine, very important, the types of food and wine. And finally, where to stay, because these towns are so small, just usually hundreds of regular year-round inhabitants. They don't have big hotels. Some of them may have really small hotels with maybe 20 rooms, but oftentimes you're going to stay in a room for rent or an apartment, which is becoming much more and more common these days with Airbnb. So as always, I like to start with maps and get you really oriented. So on the left, we have a map of Italy, and Liguria is the province where the Cinque Terre is, and Liguria is all the way up in a little bend in the boot, all the way up at the top. It frontiers, or it borders France. And then the Piemonte region is just above it. I did a Piemonte talk just last month. So you can watch that if you're interested in the neighbor to the north. And I have a close-up view from Google Map over here. And you can see there are a couple of towns that I want to point out that are quite important, which are Genoa and Pisa. I'm going to refer to these again, but Genoa is the capital of the region of Liguria, and the Cinque Terre, this is where, if you take the train in, which most of you will do, I will tell you right at the beginning, I would highly recommend not driving, because the roads there are very, very windy and you will not find a place to park. So a car is really unhelpful in the Cinque Terre. So most of you, if not all, will go into the town of La Spezia here at the very south. So then we can go in even a little bit more narrow in and close up. And this is a map showing you a broad view of the general area. A town that I will be talking about here in the north, Bonassola and Levanto, right here. and we can see the Cinque Terre, the 5 towns. Cinque is 5, terre means lands, and then La Spezia here, which is a major port city and the place where most of you are probably going to at least go through on a train to get into Cinque Terre. Now, the Cinque Terre, as I mentioned, these 5 towns, here they are, all 5 of them. And I want to go through these individually just to give you a brief photo overview. I have included the names of all of the towns so that you'll be able to go back and refer and know which town I'm talking about as we're looking at all this wonderful eye candy. So briefly, the history of the Cinque Terre goes back to the Bronze Age. People were living in this province of or region of Liguria since the Bronze Age. And the Bronze Age in Italy is from about 2300 BC to 950 BC. So people have been living in this verdant kind of temperate climate. Think about it a lot like the Pacific Northwest. It might get a little bit of snow in the winter, but it's mostly gets a bit of rain, a lot of sun in the summertime, though. So it's a very mild climate. So people have been living there for millennia. But we really start to know more about people in this region with the Ligurian tribes in the 1000s BC, and they predate the Romans. Now, when the Romans came through, as you know, they conquered all of Europe. And they built roads actually through this region. But before their big Roman roads, there was kind of a trading path that was established in the 1st century BC. Now, when I talk about 1st century BC, this is the time of Julius Caesar. And there are 2 settlements that are recorded to have been established at this time. One of them is just kind of up mountain or Malca of the Cinque Terre towns. That is Volastra. It's a very tiny town, which is visitable. You can hike to it. Very beautiful little town. Or the town of Porto Venere, the port of Venus, which I'll talk about quite a bit more. Then in the Middle Ages, we're moving forward now about 1,000 years. So between 1000 and 1200, the 5 towns are established. This is when the first peoples are coming down out of the hills and moving down and establishing fishing villages, but they're also doing a lot of servicing of boats with all of the maritime trade. Now, this is also where things get a little dicey for the people in the Cinque Terre because of those 2 towns that I mentioned at the beginning, Pisa and Genova. Now, these were 2 of the 4 historic maritime republics of Italy. That includes, of course, Venice, Pisa, Genoa, and the little town way to the south, Amalfi. Well, the Cinque Terre are sandwiched between 2 of those 2 rival maritime powers, Pisa and Genova. And so a lot of times you will see, if you're paying attention, including in this photo here, you will see a fortification built because of all of the pirates, all of the raids, and all of the battles going back between Pisa and Genoa. They were also fighting off the Saracens, or the people, the Moorish people, the Islamic people from the south who had come up and actually settled in places like Sicily. They were coming up now. Sicily, just to the south, a few hundred kilometers or miles, but they would actually come up and raid this area as well. So these little towns are built in a very defensive position. They were also doing a lot of trade, and people were bringing things, including wine and grapes. The viticulture has been established in this area since 2400 BC. The Greeks brought all these vines over, and then they moved up into France. So there's been a lot of maritime trade, and that you can see in the architecture and also in the food, obviously. Now we're going to move forward way ahead to 1874. These towns, as you will see, they're just tucked into the little pockets in the mountains. And in 1874 is when the railroad finally came through. Italy was a brand new country, unified in 1870. And they built a railroad finally, which actually linked these very remote villages with the outside world. But again, the architecture you're going to see as you're walking around is from centuries and centuries before, typically from 1300s. Finally, jumping forward then another 100 years, we get to the establishment of the Cinque Terre as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, not just because it's spectacularly beautiful and really really not because of that, but because of the amazing terraces that you will see all through the landscape of the Cinque Terre, because those people 1,000 years ago had to carve out a living planting their gardens and growing grapes on these heavily terraced slopes, very steep slopes. Finally, in 1999, a national park is established, and that is the park of the Cinque Terre. Now, starting at that town all the way to the south that I mentioned on the map before, Porto Venere, here you can see out on the very far kind of promontory, you can see the church of San Pietro. Now, I put this in here not just to give you a sense of the layers of history here. So we have the Church of San Pietro, which was built in 1198, which is really in its own right very old, obviously, but it was built on top of a Paleo-Christian church from the 5th century, from the 400s AD. And that itself is believed to have been built on the remnants of a Roman temple to Venus. Porto Venere means port of Venus. Now, here's Porto Venere on the kind of more, because I'm speaking to people in Hawaii, Mauka, a little bit more Mauka. We have this Doria Castle that you can see up here along, and the walls up at the very top. The Doria Castle, began in the 1100s and finished in about the 1500s, named after a noble man and a kind of a well-known call him a general or captain of the military, Andrea Doria from Genoa. Genoa looms large, as I mentioned, in this area. And this castle fortification was built up there. Again, remember Pisa, the Saracens, all of this battling going on. So Porto Venere at the south is a beautiful town, but also has a lot of these layers of history that you might not see in other places. Now, when you get into the Cinque Terre proper, and here's a view of Vernazza, you can see two towers. One here very close to the very right edge and over on the promontory. And those are from the 11th century. So we're talking these towers are over 1,000 years old. And again, they were built in order to fight off or to provide protection to the inhabitants of the town. But what you'll also see in the architecture is that most of these towns are built in quite a defensive way. They'll have a main street. This is Rio Maggiore, and they'll have a main street, and then all of these little winding, what we call carugi, which are built off of them, very narrow. And you can imagine if these marauding people from Pisa or from Sicily came up and landed and invaded, all of the inhabitants could scatter up into this more defensible kind of little alleyways. So that's what you'll see when you're walking around in the Cinque Terre. Now I'd like to, as I promised, get into the beautiful Cinque Terre villages. We're going to start at the very south and move north to Monterosso. So starting with Rio Maggiore, I'd say it's the second biggest of the towns. Up above Rio Maggiore, you can see those terraces. And there's a road up here, but again, I recommend highly that you don't take a car, take the train like the locals do. And people obviously are fishermen. These are fishing villages, traditionally fishing villages. People still do have boats, but also you can rent kayaks. Here's a kayak rack, renting kayaks. Everything is really focused down by the water, as you can imagine. Here's a very, very oft kind of Instagram town, Manarola. Manarola and Vernazza are the two most likely to be on any kind of a brochure for the Cinque Terre. So this is the second town coming up. You can see it has a port area. And in order to arrive there, interestingly enough, the train station is on the other side of this bluff. So you'll walk through a tunnel in order to get into this town. And this is the main street of the town. Again, very kind of wedged in the geography, in these little kind of niches in the mountains. Then we have Corniglia. Corniglia is the one town that doesn't really have a direct harbor because it's set up on on the top of a cliff. It can be reached by train, but cannot be reached by boat because there's no harbor. And in this photo as well, you can see those terraces, which you really get a sense of in some of these wider images. And I'd say the jewel of the crown is Vernazza. It's really beautiful town. It has just one main street that goes back up in this way, just one main street, and then all the caruggi that go off to the side. You can see the tower that I mentioned, defensive tower, and here's that other one. The photo that I showed you before was taken from right up here. Now, here's a tip that I didn't include in the outline, and that is taking photos in the Cinque Terre. Some of you may not really be that excited about hiking for 2 hours, but really want to get this photo or the other photo that I took or the photo from before from Manarola. Well, if you hike out to those trails and just hike up and outside of town, turn around and look back, and that's where the photos are. So you don't have to do the whole 2-hour hike. The whole 2-hour hike isn't looking down on beautiful views, but we'll get to hiking in a minute. So the final town is Monterosso. Monterosso is the one Cinque Terre town that has an actual beach. And you can see it has all the, iconic Riviera umbrellas and the chairs, which you can rent for a half a day or a day and spend your time there. Really nice thing to do. You don't have to just bring your hiking poles and hike all day. You can also spend a nice day relaxing by the beach. All right, now moving around. So as I mentioned before, the train is really the way to go. The locals drive sometimes, but rarely, because it can take a half an hour, 45 minutes to get from one town to another, because they have to drive up these windy, tiny roads up and over and down, and then there's no place to park. And so people take the trains. The trains between the Cinque Terre towns take from 1 to 2 minutes, maybe 3, to get between from town to town. Oftentimes you will arrive in a train tunnel like you see here at Manarola. But we'll also talk about moving around by foot, and this is where we'll get into the hiking and the trails, and also by boat. Now, here's another map of the Cinque Terre. I'm going to refer to this one a lot. The reason that I chose it is it nicely shows even Levanto up here to the top, and over here on the very left-hand side. It's to the north of the Cinque Terre. It's connected by rail and by trail. Then we have all of the Cinque Terre towns here, and the FS symbol means train station. So you can connect by train, and all of these different colors spaghetti, this is trails. So when we often think about the Cinque Terre, we think about the trails that lead this blue line directly between the 5 towns. But there are many, many, many trails. So you're not limited to just those. Porto Venere is down here all the way to the very right-hand side. Okay. All right, let me see. Next slide. The Cinque Terre Treno card is a recommendation if you want to move around, if you plan to spend a day kind of hopping between towns. It is a hop-on, hop-off pass that you can buy. Now, you can buy an individual train ticket in between the towns, but it's going to cost €5 for a 1 to 2 minute train ride. So at $18.50 for the Cinque Terre Treno card, hop on, hop off all day long. It's really, worth the money. The Cinque Terre Treno card also includes access to the trails. As I mentioned, the Cinque Terre is a national park and requires a €7.50 pass to actually hike on those trails. Now, I've included both the Cinque Terre trekking card, which does not include the train, and that's $7.50. So if you want to go hiking on those trails, then you need to show this card or the Treno card. Now, another advantage, and I sound like a salesperson for the Treno card, but really I'm getting no kickback from the Trenitalia. But the Treno card also, in addition to hop on, hop off all day, gives you free access to bathrooms. Why is this important? because public bathrooms in Italy often cost money. And here in the Cinque Terre, I believe they're €1.50 now at the train stations. So this is another benefit, is that you can flash your Trino card and get into the bathroom without having to pay. And then finally, there are free shuttle buses as well. And to get up to some of the towns that are upslope of the Cinque Terre towns that are down on the water, you can actually take little park shuttle buses, kind of vans, that will take you all the way up high. And so those can be another mode of transportation that you can access with the Trino card. Now, where do you buy them? You buy them at any of the train stations in the Cinque Terre. They will often have, I think all of them have a Cinque Terre point, which is kind of a tourist information office. You can see this is a line. I took this photo. This is a lineup for buying those. And you can see this was probably last year, 2022, and people are wearing masks there. That you won't see masks like that so much in Italy, though. When I'm on public transportation, me personally, I'm wearing a mask these days, just like back last year, but that's me. So trail tips. I want to talk to you about the closed trails. We talked about hiking passes a bit already, trail markers, avoiding crowds, and safety. So here's our map that we've seen before, and I've drawn a circle around the 3 towns here where the trails are closed. There is a trail between Rio Maggiore and Manarola and Corniglia. These have been closed for a decade, I think. They are working on them. I have actually seen construction being done on these, but I think construction in Italy, it's a lot like Hawaii. There are lots of parallels. You know, any kind of big building project, it tends to end up taking a little bit longer than we think it should. So there is no news about when those will open. Believe me, we're all waiting for those trails to reopen. So these 2 trails are closed. Unfortunately, for those of us who are not really mountain goats and don't want a lot of elevation gain and loss, these are the lower impact trails. The trail actually between Rio Maggiore and Manarola is actually called the Via dell'Amore. You can see it here with the little hearts, because it's very flat. It's really, really easy. You could push a baby carriage on that. And again, these trails were the way that people could get from town to town to town in the old days before the train. That's how they moved around. These villages were very, very isolated before the train. I can't overstate that enough. Another thing that you'll see on this map is the distances. This is Alta Via Cinque Terre, which these are the high trails up here. Okay. Again, you can get very detailed trail maps and get up and get out of the Cinque Terre on many trails and have wonderful views. But in Europe, unlike here, the way that they mark the length of a trail is by the length of time, not so much the length in kilometers or in miles. So you'll see distances marked that way. Now here, once you've got your Cinque Terre pass, and you're out on the trail, this is someone going between Vernazza and Corniglia now. You can see here is a trail sign. Look for red and white stripe. Those are the trail marks or blazes. And you can see here on this sign that to get to San Bernardino, which is above Vernazza, takes an hour. Cogoletta, where I've never been, is an hour and a half. And that's what you'll see in terms of the trail signs. Here's one that I took in Monterosso, in Levanto. And you can see again the towns, and this is just on a city wall. You will see these even in a city wall. It will point you towards trails because this is such a hiking mecca. Now, when you're hiking, it's important to keep safety in mind, always wearing appropriate footwear. I've actually seen articles in the news about people saying don't hike in slippers. You know, I've seen women hiking in high heels. I cannot even imagine it. But, you know, obviously good footwear is important, and carrying water, especially if it's hot. And, you know, you've probably seen in the news, it's been very, very hot in Italy this summer. The other thing that I would recommend for you is to take the inside when passing others. Whenever I'm talking to tour members about the Cinque Terre, I always recommend, if you meet someone coming the opposite from the opposite direction, take the inside, because unlike the US, Italy has different kind of rules about liability, and you're not necessarily going to find big guardrails. There can be sheer drop-offs, and in some places the trails can be quite narrow. So be sure to keep to the inside is my tip. And to avoid crowds on the trails, because the Cinque Terre has become such a famous destination, I would really always recommend hiking very early in the morning. Get up as soon as the sun is up and get on those trails. It'll be cooler. And most kind of prime time for tourism is from 9 to 5. So if you can get on those trails before 9 a.m. or get to the next town before then, that would be advisable. The other recommendation would be to take an alternate route. And an alternate route could be to go up high in that high trail that I mentioned, or to go to alternate locations. Now, one of those, which is one of my favorite towns, is Levanto. And that is just to the north of the Cinque Terre. You can hike there. There's a nice trail, takes about 3 hours, and it gets to this beautiful, and I took this photo, this nice seaside town. You can see the beautiful beach down here. But it's a terrific trail, takes about 3 hours one way, and it's included in your Cinque Terre Treno card. So you can then take the train back to wherever you want to. Here you can see I've indicated with the red arrow exactly where Levanto is, and again, takes about 3 hours. Now, a nice thing about this trail, which this is another picture that I took on the trail, there are very few people. Probably more now than last time I hiked it, but no passes are required because this is outside of that national park. So no hiking pass required, and fantastic views. This is me looking towards the Cinque Terre, and you can actually see in the little kind of Puca's here's Cornelia. You can look along the coastline here and see all 5 of the Cinque Terre towns from this trail. And again, here is another trail marker. You'll see these everywhere. If you take a high road, this is looking down at Cornelia from up above at San Bernardino, which is just above Vernazza. So if you take one of those trails up, then you have a fantastic view of the different towns from way above. So I hope I'm selling you on these alternative trails. Another way to go, which is, I think, a fantastic way, especially if you don't want to get out and get up high or do a long trail, is to take the ferry. And there are ferries that go from town to town all day long, about hourly. It costs 40 euros for a day pass. It's not included in the Cinque Terre Treno card. That's different systems, but you can take the ferry in between all of the towns, including Cornelia, and you can get to more limited access, but you can get to Levanto and all the way down south to Porto Venere with the ferry. And the benefits of the ferry, the benefit of the ferry is that you get to see the Cinque Terre towns from the water, which is really, I think, the absolute best view. And if you're going and you're going to spend a few days, it's a great thing to do on your first day. Get a kind of a once-over preview of all the towns, and then maybe decide to go to one or two if you don't want to go to all of them. The ferry tickets can be bought at each one of the Cinque Terre towns. Here's another part of Cinque Terre's history I didn't talk about. There's a German bunker. Yes, the Germans were there during World War II, and you will see some German bunkers. I imagine those young ladies are not supposed to be over there taking those photos, but you can see at Monterosso, the ferry coming in. And again, they go about every hour all day long. So that's another way to move around. Now, as I've mentioned the crowds before, the crowds there are about, let's say, 5,000 people, maybe fewer, living in the Cinque Terre towns. And there are millions I've seen 2.5 million. I've seen 5 million in different articles. So I don't know that anyone actually has an accurate count, but this is a photo that I took in the spring of the train station at Monterosso. Now, some things that you want to consider because of the crowds are safety and keeping an eye on your backpacks and watching out for pickpockets. That's really important. I took this photo a few years ago. This is pre-pandemic. This is getting off the train at Vernazza. And so this isn't, Photoshop. This is me getting out of the train. And it looks like the Vatican Museum to me. So you need to be very careful, wear your backpacks on your front, carry your purses, not like this lady in the stripe is doing down at her side, but holding it in your front. Behave like you're on a Roman subway or in any big city. And be aware of pickpockets. Don't wear your backpack like the gentleman on the left with the black backpack. Don't wear it on your back, okay? Lots of pickpockets to be aware of. Now, this is a street in in Monterosso this spring. So it's not even summer yet, and you can get an idea of what the crowds are like, okay? See, I think this guy with the umbrella here is a tour guide, maybe. So what's ended up happening in the Cinque Terre in the last decade or so is that the Cinque Terre is now being visited by cruise ship passengers who dock at Livorno, which is further south in Tuscany, or they dock at La Spezia, that town very to the south of the Cinque Terre. And when there are cruise ships in, these guides will walk around with their group and they'll be holding a paddle and people following them, and they can't get their people up to the Cinque Terre by any other means than by train either. And so you'll have these big groups of cruise ship people moving through with a guide. And so that contributes to the congestion. But one of the suggestions that I would have if you want to visit the towns is, again, go early or go late. Consider staying in the Cinque Terre towns and getting out maybe onto a high trail or taking a train and going to Levanto or going to other places during the day, or taking the boat and going down to Porto Venere. There are islands near Porto Venere you can visit, doing that during the day, and then enjoying the Cinque Terre towns at night. Because just like Venice, the Cinque Terre is mostly filled with day trippers. Most people are not staying there. So it's very congested between 9 and 5. So that would be my tip for you if you do want to visit the Cinque Terre towns. Another recommendation that I have for you to avoid crowds is thinking about the time of year. Now, August is this is the week of Ferragosto for the Italians. And so this place is jammed packed with Italians, most likely right now. But in September, it goes back to not so many Italians, but there will be Germans, French, Belgian, Americans, people from all over the world in September, even into October. So as I've mentioned on other talks before, if you can go before Easter or after November 1st, the crowds drop off dramatically. If I were to give you a month that I would say this is probably going to be the time when you're going to have the least likely time to have crowds, certainly the winter time, but the weather's not that great. I would say probably March or November would be my recommendation. And it may sound a little bit crazy. You might be thinking that it's cool. Well, for me personally, I'd rather have it be cool than to be guaranteed of these types of crowds, and also the very intense heat that Italy's been having the last several years. It can get really warm in May through September. Okay, so really April and October now are moderate temperature months. So just keep that in mind. All right, so the Cinque Terre environs, I mentioned that I wanted to give you some alternatives to places to go for visiting Cinque Terre. And this is Porto Venere, which you've seen before, which is a lovely town, same kind of architecture as Cinque Terre. And there you can see the Doria Castle. That church that I showed in the history section is right out here at this point. Wonderful seafood, great place to catch a ferry. And this map actually shows you the islands that are very near to Porto Venere, which you can take a ferry boat out and do a cruise and visit those islands as well. This is the broad view showing Porto Venere, the Cinque Terre, and Levanto, and a little tiny town I'm going to talk about in a minute called Bonassola. So Porto Venere, again, spectacular. And then just on the other side of those wonderful buildings is this fantastic cliff. So if you take a ferry and go all the way down to Porto Venere, or you stay in Porto Venere, this is the type of water and the cliff and the coastline that you see. Very dramatic, really spectacular. Porto Venere, you're not going to be alone, but it's not going to necessarily feel like an amusement park crush of crowds like what you might find so much in the Cinque Terre. The next place is Levanto, which I think is fantastic. It's a great home base for visiting Cinque Terre or just for staying nearby the Cinque Terre if you don't really want to see the Cinque Terre. It has the benefits of it are you can see the guy in the soccer clothes. I took this photo in the springtime before they have all the beach chairs out, but you can see this is probably April and people are in t-shirt and shorts. He is. And people are starting to put out the chairs for the summertime, but they haven't done it yet. But the weather can be fantastic in April. We had a great April. But it's got a wonderful promenade there that you can walk on. You can rent a bike there. You can take a bike and go through a train tunnel to another town called Bonassola. Now, through that train tunnel, I'll get to that in a minute. One thing I forgot to mention this. I threw these photos in because I thought this was quite funny. And since I'm talking to the Friends of Italy Society of Hawaii, it's relevant. Levanto has another thing going for it. It is a kind of a surf capital for Europe, if you can believe it. This little town in Italy, and the Europeans from Germany or from around Italy or from Austria, Switzerland, France, wherever, they'll get in these little vans like this. And with their wetsuits, because it's cold, it's not Hawaii. And they'll come down and they'll spend however long just sleeping in their van and going surfing here at this beach at Levanto. And there are the swells that they've driven however many hundreds of kilometers. Not that big, but that's the beach where we just saw the bar and the guys with the surfboard. So that's just a little aside. So back to Levanto, if you walk through this little train tunnel at one end of it, and after about, 15 minutes walk, 10 minutes walk, you'll come upon little beaches like this, which are a bit more remote than what you would see. People are mostly lying on rocks and things like that in the Cinque Terre, but this is a nice little beach. You won't be alone, but it won't be overly crowded there. This is between Levanto and Bonassola to the north. And once you get through to Bonassola, you'll arrive there, and this is what you'll see coming out of the train tunnel at Bonassola. You can see up here at the top this little beach here, and this is kind of my little secret right here. This is basically my rock. I go there every time I go to the Cinque Terre. I go to Bonassola just because it's so beautiful. And it's got this wonderful little beach, but it also has this wonderful little rocks to walk out and sit like these people with the umbrella. I took that again in the springtime, right? So really nice weather even in April. And it also has a little trail that you can walk out to. It's probably, half a mile, maybe, not too much elevation gain, but you get some nice views back over to Bonassola. So and it's got a nice rail. So it's a little safer than some of the Cinque Terre trails. And here's the town and the beach of Bonassola view from that trail. Now, finally, food and wine. So obviously I'm gonna just briefly go over what there is to eat. All kinds of seafood. The mussels are actually grown, kind of cultivated, farmed at Porto Venere. You can get all kinds of seafood dishes there. That's a given. But also the Genoa, the area of Genoa and Liguria is the home of pesto. And on those terraces, people have gardens where they're growing tomatoes, they're growing lemons, they're growing grapes for sure, and they're growing pesto. And the pesto is absolutely going to be the best pesto you ever had in your life. It's also the land of focaccia. So focaccia, you will find focaccia by the slice, really easy grab and go street food. It can have just some olives on it, or just olive oil, or sliced onions, or can have cheese and be like a pizza. All kinds of toppings. You will find focaccia everywhere. And then my favorite that I want to show you, I've got a photo of it, is called panzotti ai sugo di noci. After I show you that, I'm going to move into talking about the wines of the Cinque Terre and limoncino. So panzotti, the first thing that I do want to tell you about, though, is anchovies. Now, I'm from the Midwest originally. I was not born in Hawaii. I'm from Kansas. And where I come from, seafood came batter dipped, frozen square, and in a box. And those of you who are not from here probably know what I'm talking about. But I always hard sell anchovies, fresh anchovies, and they can be grilled or kind of a la plancha, like you see over here on the left, or they can be like on the right there. They can be stuffed. They're fantastic, really light, not a super strong flavor, not what you think about with the salted from a jar on the pizza that people often don't like. Phenomenal. If you go to the Cinque Terre, look for fresh anchovies. I would avoid anchovies on pasta unless you like the salted preserved anchovies. If you get anchovies on pasta, that's what you're going to get. As an appetizer, like in either of these cases here, they will be served in this way. You can also get them fried and just eat them out of a cone like you were eating French fries, sorry. The next thing, finally, panzotti ai sugo di noci. Panzotti is another word for it, like ravioli. So it's a stuffed type of a pasta, and it comes with a walnut sauce and a cream walnut sauce, and then stuffed with ricotta and herbs typically. Finally, wine. Now, I have to talk about the viticulture of the Cinque Terre. These terraces, this is all vines. Now, how on earth? You can't get any type of a mechanical harvester up and doing the kind of work there, doing the harvesting. You have to, it's manual. People are walking up and down. They're manually picking the grapes, and they're using what's called a trenino, which is like a monorail. You see this this rail here? Someone has their mic on. Could you mute? Thank you. And then this monorail has what's called a trenino on it. This on the left-hand side, you can see the trenino. It's a little, I don't know, maybe like a lawnmower engine that pulls kind of a cogwheel up the very steep monorail and bringing the nice cargo of the grapes. And the wines of this area, both the Cinque Terre DOC wine and the Chaquetra, are white wines. Now, the Cinque Terre DOC, if you're not familiar with DOC, Denominazione d'Origine Controllata, it basically means that you're making wines with a specific set of rules. Now, here, the wines are made with 3 types of indigenous grapes. Some of them you probably have never heard of. Bosco, Albarola, and Vermentino. Probably you've heard of Vermentino. Those are the 3 types of grapes. And spectrographic tests have actually shown that the grapes that are grown here in the Cinque Terre are high in salts, which makes sense because it's right by the coastline, right? Terroir and the minerality it gets from the soil, but it also picks up the salt. Now, the bottle there on the left is Cinque Terre, which is a really hard word to spell, easier to say. But Cinque Terre is a sweet dessert wine. It can be up to 17% alcohol. It's this kind of, warm color you can see there, and a bit dense, kind of syrupy. But it is made with the same grapes, but has different set of rules. It's done with a pasito technique, which means that the grapes are actually aged and allowed to just kind of dry into almost raisins on the vines. They legally, according to the DOC rules, can't be harvested before the 1st of November, and then must be hung in a well-ventilated area for 70 days to further dry. And then they're pressed, and they're very, very dense in sugar then. They're pressed and then aged in either pear and cherry wood barrels for at least a year. So this is a type of wine that's unique to Cinque Terre. And this guy is quite interesting. Actually, he's come down from France because he's trying to renovate old vineyards, and some of these old vineyards in the Cinque Terre have come into kind of they've just been let to go fallow. And he's got this project where he's taken a 1 hectare, which is 2.2 acres of terraced area, and he is trying to restore these very, very old vineyards. So he's doing really a lot of manual work and very, very small production of wine, and he's right near Vernazza. Finally, in terms of alcoholic beverages, limoncino, not limoncello. You might be familiar with limoncello. That is from the south, from the Amalfi Coast area, where they grow lots and lots of lemons. But with this mild climate, they grow lots of lemons in the Cinque Terre as well. And they call it limoncino. Of course, if you say, I'd like a limoncello in the Cinque Terre, they'll know what you're talking about, and they won't correct you. But if you say you'd like a limoncino, they'll probably smile because they'll know that you're in on it. Now, where to stay? Because the Cinque Terre towns are small. They're built into the crags and nooks and crannies of the mountains. You don't have big hotels. There are a few decent sized hotels, but most people are staying what are called affittacamere, which means rooms for rent. And these are, what we might think of as like Airbnbs, traditional. And so you can find apartments of any configuration that you're looking for. You could find just a room with a bathroom. And they often come with spectacular views. They can be basic. Obviously, they can be really fancy. But I did a quick search today, and you can find them on Airbnb, and you can find them on booking.com. So price ranges from, on the low end, 100 euros a night, all the way up. Okay. Then this just gives you a show. I just grabbed this from one of the affittacamere places that I found online, just to give you an idea of what they're like. And they're really characteristic. These are the apartments of people. They've converted them into rooms for rent because now that with all of the tourism, this is a great way for them to earn an income. So I'm at the end of the talk about the Cinque Terre, and I just wanted to take 2 seconds and let you know that I'm about to release my new tour, the Tuscan Harvest Tour for 2024. It's going to be a 10-day tour with Florence, Siena, and we're going to stay up in the Chianti region in Rara in Chianti. And I'm about to release it this week. So I put it on for this talk because you are the first ones to know about this tour being released for next fall. And I want to say grazie to everybody for attending, and to the Friends of Italy Society of Hawaii. Thank you so much for having me. And if you'd like to reach me, you can see my email there, trina@guidedby.com, so guided-by.com, or find me on Instagram or our website. And I will stop sharing my screen now. And I'm here for questions. All right. And